everyone. This is the second attempt to start this event. Apologies for the technical difficulties that we had this morning, but I hope that everybody is now able to log on. There was another email sent to all who have been invited and accepted with the updated password. So please use that. Please also forward it to your contacts. So with a slight delay, which I do apologize for, we can actually start the event. Nonetheless, I have to say that I'm personally very excited about this event today. It is on one of the key thematic priorities that we have coming up as part of our new strategies, looking at the skills of future of work, and in this context, particularly what digitalization can do. At EBRD, we firmly believe that broadening access to economic and labor market opportunities is fundamental to sustainable market development. If people are given a chance to access market relevant skills and succeed, they are more likely to participate in the workforce and engage in activities that lead to economic growth and prosperity. In line with the distinct market transition mandate that the bank has, we have developed an approach of promoting equality of opportunity and gender equality that specifically harnesses the power of the private sector to achieve impact, to broaden access to skills and employment opportunities and sustainable livelihoods, and to build inclusive business environments to create gender responsive services. Over the course of the next 5 years, we will seek to broaden this approach further and scale up our activities in this area, specifically also in relation to the bank's thematic priorities of promoting a more green and digital future for all. If we look across the EBRD region today, the challenges are manifold. We are still in the midst of an unprecedented health crisis, which threatens to dial back the hard-won progress on gender equality in particular over the past decades, and further exacerbates inequalities and threatens the livelihoods of so many. We also see the impact of climate change, as well as the emerging green economy transition, creating new sets of winners, but also of losers. Digitalization and automation leave people with stranded skills, often unable to remain in or rejoin the labor market. But digitalization can also open up access to new markets and the future of work. What is clear is that the world around us is changing very fast. There are longer-term megatrends that gradually impact on the way we live and work, and then there are shocks that hit us sometimes overnight, requiring rapid responses. All these factors have a huge impact on the way that people can gain or lose access to economic opportunities, and they create challenges for our countries of operation to maintain and build their human capital. When we look at the skills of the future, we therefore need to focus not only on what is required at the point of entry into the labour market, but also to unlock more transparent career pathways and professional progression. We need to champion continuous skills development, boosting workers' adaptability, and foster strategic labour force development approaches. To achieve this, we need to support decision makers at corporate and at national levels, to gather and analyse faster and more comprehensively information on workforce and skills development, and also, of course, to monitor and respond to the challenges. We need to be able to provide this information in more or less real time and use big data and data analytics that offer great potential to improve the understanding of decision makers in evolving landscapes today. When addressing the challenges of the digital transition, we can help companies to develop nationally accredited and market relevant training programs, for example, on digital literacy and other skills related. We can also support them to reskill workers with stranded skills, spurred by automation and other technology-driven sectoral shifts. For example, in Ukraine, we're helping an IT company, Data Group, to introduce new digital learning programs with a specific focus on attracting women into the ICT sector. In Turkey, we are collaborating with UNDP to establish a multi-stakeholder network. It's an online platform which is called Skills for an Inclusive Future. The aim of this is to enable countries to build their human capital in line with the skills of the future through knowledge sharing and policy advisory services. So the use of big data brings huge potential across all these areas. Skills intelligence and HR analytics based on big data in combination with other information sources can allow companies to become more strategic about their workforce management. They can help improve hiring practices, engage in more effective upskilling and team performances, For policymakers and other institutional stakeholders, big data can complement business and individual surveys to enable quicker and more efficient evidence-based decisions on education and skills, labor market policies, in order fundamentally to increase the resilience of the human capital in their countries. However, as with everything, there is always a downside. Using big data for labor market analysis is not a panacea for everything. It is often limited to representing higher skilled jobs, while lower skilled ones tend to be captured less well. Similarly, in big data analysis, the possibility of artificial intelligence reinforcing existing inequalities and stereotypes is high. So this is an area that still needs to be much better understood and addressed to ensure equal opportunities for women and older workers, youth, people from backgrounds with lower education, or other groups. So for all these reasons today, we want to learn directly from practitioners and hear about their perspectives on the challenges and opportunities of using big data to support employability and skills development. This will inform the design also of our new approaches and products for us to better support our clients and policy partners in relation to the future of work. I'm really excited to have a fantastic panel of experts here today, including from CEDEFOP, the EU's Agency for Skills and Policy Development, the global consultancy firm Fathom, SkillsFuture in Singapore, but also our client Tofaş in Turkey. But to start off, I'm honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Stijn Brakke. Stijn is a senior economist at the OECD, where he leads the Future of Work initiative in the Employment, Labour and Social Affairs Directorate. Stijn will give us a big picture overview of the recent trends across OECD countries and highlight some patterns that are emerging, in particular in Eastern Europe and Turkey, as well as, of course, some ideas of what we can do together in the future. So without further ado, Stijn, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and I'm really honored to be the keynote speaker here today. So thank you for giving me the floor. I have to warn you, I have internet problems, and someone was meant to come this morning to fix it, but his car broke down, so that didn't work out. If any issues, do let me know. Now, I'm not sure I can share my presentation here. I can share a file or a whiteboard, but I cannot share the presentation, so maybe if you can put it up on your side, that would help.
Sure, if somebody from our side, please could share the presentation, that would be great.
So, I mean, while we're waiting for the presentation, what I'm planning to do in the few minutes that I have is, first of all, give you a brief overview of some of the main trends that we are seeing in the labor market. I will highlight some of the EBRD countries in these trends and point out to what extent they might be different from other OECD countries that we cover. And in the second part of my presentation, I want to talk a little bit more about big data, how we are using it at the OECD to analyze future work trends, and secondly, to talk a little bit about how big data might be used also to help us transition to that future world of work. Now, I still don't see my slides, so I guess, shall I just continue talking without slides?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Why don't you just start, and then we will see if we can bring up the slides. If not, then we will be delighted to listen to you anyway.
So my first slide was going to show you data which you might have already seen, which is the OECD's estimates of the risk of automation. And if you look across OECD countries, we've estimated that around 14% of jobs are at high risk of automation. But on top of that, you have a significant share of jobs, probably around a third of jobs, that might not be automated and entirely, and might not disappear as a result of automation, but will significantly change as a result of automation. So it's really between 40 and 50% of jobs on average that will be highly affected by automating technologies. And if you look at countries covered by EBRD, you actually see that many of these countries face a very high risk of automation, much higher than in other countries. And partly the reason for that is because of sectoral composition and the occupational composition of these economies. But these are the risk of automation. That doesn't actually mean that the automation will happen. Whether automation actually happens depends on whether or not this makes business sense. It depends on ethical considerations. It depends on a whole host of factors. And the other thing that you should remember, in addition to all these factors, that automation or technologies also create jobs. And so in my next slide, what I was going to show you is, first of all, we've looked at what happened in occupations that were at high risk of automation. And what we have found is that on average, occupations that we estimated to be at high risk of automation did see lower employment growth. So these are jobs in manufacturing, in agriculture, and these occupations have seen over the last 10 years lower employment growth than occupations which were at low risk of automation. So actually, if you can skip to my third slide, so not the next one, but the one after. Occupations, so just to summarize, occupations which, sorry, can someone switch to the next couple of slides? Until you see a graph with a downward sloping line, if that's possible. So occupations which are at high risk of automation did see lower employment growth. But one thing which we also found is that nearly every single occupation actually did see employment growth over this period. And what's also very interesting is that at the country level, a high risk of automation does not necessarily translate into lower employment growth. So, and that was going to be my third slide, is that in fact, in nearly all OECD countries, with only very few exceptions, we have seen employment growth over the last 20 years. So before the crisis hit, employment rates were actually at a record high in most OECD countries, including in many of the EBRD countries. If you look at the distribution of employment rates, so yeah, if you skip a couple of more slides, please, if that's possible. Next slide. Okay, so here we are at the employment rates. So you can see the diamonds. You can see that in almost every single country, employment rates were at a record high just before the crisis hit. Most EBRD countries that we cover are somewhere in the middle of the pack, and with some countries like Turkey, Greece, actually with relatively low employment rates. But again, we see, despite automation, despite new technologies, we see employment growing. And so that's a positive thing. Now, if you can go to the next slide, this is all on the surface, of course. On the surface, everything seems to be going really well. But under the surface, what we notice is that there's a lot of change. Now, let me focus on non-EBRD countries first. And what we see in most OECD countries is this polarization of the labor market, which you will have heard of, which is a decline in the share of routine middle-skilled jobs. These are jobs, often manufacturing jobs occupied by middle-educated workers, jobs that can be automated. What we also see in these countries is strong growth in high-skilled jobs and a little bit of growth in low-skilled, mainly service sector jobs. Now, when we look at many of the Eastern European countries, now I don't have the data for all the countries, but what we see is a slightly different image. We see strong growth in high-skilled jobs, so that's really good news. But we actually see declines in both middle-skilled and especially low-skilled jobs. So you see an upgrading really in many of these Eastern European countries, which in many ways is good news because we are creating better jobs, more high-skilled jobs. But there's a challenge here, and that's making sure that people can get these jobs. So if you move to the next slide, it shows that the real challenge in managing these transitions is making sure that people can grab these opportunities, and that's not always the case. So what I show you in this slide is just one example of a group that might be falling behind. What this graph shows you is the likelihood that men have secondary qualifications, so low-educated men, the likelihood that they are in low-skilled occupations. And I've circled the countries that kind of are of more relevance here. But in nearly all countries, what you see is that over time, this group is increasingly falling into low-skill occupations. So they might have had medium-skill occupations before, now they're being pushed into low-skill occupations, and often occupations with worse working conditions and job quality. So clearly some groups are increasingly struggling in the labor market. And the key point I want to make here is that despite the opportunities that the future of work brings, some groups are falling behind. And to me, this is really the key challenge. So if you can move to the next slide. One additional point I want to make before moving on to the big discussion is that everything I've presented so far is really based on technologies that we've known over the last few years. So these are robots and these types of automating technologies. But we know that new technologies like artificial intelligence are emerging. And what's new about artificial intelligence, and the reason I think we should really focus on these technologies in terms of labor market analysis, is that the early evidence that we have suggests that these technologies automate primarily tasks which are currently done by high-skilled workers. So these are non-routine cognitive tasks. And this graph is a little bit small, but it shows you the exposure of different occupations to potential automation by artificial intelligence. And what you see is that the high-skilled jobs like business professionals, IT professionals, lawyers, managers, these are the kinds of occupations which are most exposed to automating technologies. But, and this is a big but, is that this is not necessarily a bad thing. Again, the evidence is very scant at this stage, but what we are seeing from the emerging evidence is that, in fact, these technologies help these workers become more productive, help these workers earn higher wages, increase the demand for these workers, and increase employment in these occupations. So artificial intelligence, in a kind of inverted way, risks further increasing inequalities in the labor market. So going on to my next slide, what I think is really key when we talk about the future of work is not worrying so much about a jobless future, at least not globally. But what we really need to worry about is about managing transitions and making sure that everybody can grab the opportunities that lie ahead. So what does that mean? It means investing in training, because many people might be displaced, or as I showed earlier, people will have to adapt on the job. But I also want to stress the importance of initial education here, because when we looked at the kind of polarization of the labor market and what is driving this, yes, some older workers are being displaced and have to move to other jobs, but the bulk of these transitions are driven by young people entering jobs that are different from the kind of jobs that young people entered 10, 20 years ago. So much of this change is driven by young people entering different kinds of jobs. And so we need to make sure that young people enter the labor market with the right skills. And I don't think we are always doing well at this, because there's some indication that young people are struggling more and more in the labor market, partly because the kinds of jobs they used to enter are being automated, so the entry-level jobs are disappearing. So skills are very important, but adequate social protection is also something really important. And we've known, for instance, the crisis has shown this, that large groups of people do not have adequate social protection. And why is social protection so important? It's important because it allows you to bridge the time period between losing a job and getting a new job. And if you don't have that social protection, you can be pushed into finding any job, and any job that doesn't necessarily match your skills very well. So that will have implications for productivity and growth in the long run. And the third thing that I think is really important in managing these transitions is social dialogue. We know that countries where they have effective constructive social dialogue, we have better outcomes in terms of transitions between occupations, between sectors, because social partners talk to each other about the changes in the labor market and what is required in terms of skills, what is required in terms of social protection. So healthy, constructive social dialogue can really help manage these transitions. So in my last couple of minutes, I want to talk a little bit about big data and what big data can help us do. So if you move over to the next slide. First of all, I want to talk about how big data can help us understand the trends that I've talked about a little bit more. Now, let me start with my conclusion is I don't think big data will replace our more traditional data sources like labor force surveys, etc. I think these will remain important, but big data can be a really useful complement to these data sources. Why can they be a complement? Because I think they're much more timely than our traditional data sources. Labor force surveys often take a year or more to become available, so they're kind of outdated, especially when you're talking about a context like the current one with the crisis. New big data can be more timely. The size of big data is very important because it allows us to go into a certain granularity, which we don't have with some of our existing data sources. But there are also important limitations that we need to be aware of. For example, the quality of the data is sometimes questionable. The data have been designed not for policy analysis, but for a very specific business purpose very often. So we also need to wonder about the representativeness of some of these data. Often they do not represent the entire labor market, and it's sometimes difficult to check the representatives of these data. And also because this is a relatively new development, the short time series are often a limitation as well when it comes down to labor market analysis. So at the OECD, that hasn't stopped us from working with data from LinkedIn, from MasterCard, from GitHub, from Glass AI, from Google Trends, etc. And I want to just give you a few examples of the kinds of analysis that we're beginning to do, because I think we're at the beginning of this process, and I think we will see more of this in the future. But for example, we are initiating in the second half of this year a longitudinal survey of Uber drivers. So we will be following Uber drivers even when they leave the platform every 6 months with a survey. But our partnership with Uber means that Uber will also give us data that they are collecting from their drivers, so data on the number of rides, data on time spent on the platform, data on the kind of income that they have on the platform, that we can then merge on to our survey data to really build a very rich data source. So you can see the complementarity here between two more traditional data sources and the big data. We've also been using burning glass data. This is data on vacancies that's been scraped from the internet to try and understand skills needs a little bit better, because vacancies list the kind of skills that employers are looking for. And so this gives us real-time data about what it is employers are looking for. And so one example of the analysis we've been doing is to see what kind of technical AI skills are being demanded in the labor market. And so we see that very few occupations or vacancies at this point, it's like 0.35%, seek these kind of skills, but we also see that the demand is increasing very rapidly. And just one more example is that we've been using LinkedIn data to look at the AI talent pool. So if you move to the next slide, this is just an example of the kind of data that we make available on our website. What this chart shows you is the AI skills of the kind of workers in each of the OECD member countries that we're looking at. And the one is the average of AI skills across OECD countries. So if you're above one, you have above AI skills, above average AI skills in your workforce. If you're below one, you have a lack of these skills compared to other countries. And just again, focusing on EBRD countries, you can see that they're really hunched towards the bottom of this chart, which indicates that perhaps they're less well prepared for this AI revolution, at least in terms of the development of AI technologies. So that's again an interesting insight which we would not have been able to get with more traditional sources. And now on to my final slide, I want to talk a little bit about, I've talked earlier about the transitions, and that really managing these transitions is really important if we think about the future of work and about resilience and adaptability of our labor markets. And I think big data and artificial intelligence can really help us manage these transitions better. So just to give you two kinds of examples, and some of this has already been mentioned, but this big data can really be helpful in identifying skills needs in real time, because we know what vacancies are being published, and at a high level of granularity, we can see the skills that are being demanded in the labor market. And that in turn can help us identify or design training programs that provide these skills. It can also help us identify the people who can easily transition into these new occupations, because we know what kind of skills they have, and we know what skills they are lacking. And so we can have much more targeted recommendations in terms of training for individuals. And also, I think AI and big data can help us make training programs more interesting. I mean, one example is that they can help us simulate real work environments much better than more traditional forms of training. So it can also help us improve the quality of training. Another example of how AI and big data can be used for improving labor market performance is matching. We know that increasingly public employment services and private employment services are using AI and big data to match workers to vacancies. And often that means they can reach out and find more vacancies, they can find more candidates. And also because of the granularity of the skills analysis that can be done, this can result in better matching. And the better matching also reduces the search costs of people, because they are provided with vacancies or with kind of job opportunities, which are a better match for their skills profile. And also from a public employment service point of view, it can help the public employment service focus their intervention or target their interventions much better on individuals that they know are at higher risk of becoming long-term unemployed. So you can see there are so many applications, potential applications of AI and big data, But again, I do want to have some of the warnings that we have raised earlier, especially, for example, around the quality of this data. And we've already mentioned the issue around bias, and bias affects some groups which are already underrepresented or disadvantaged in the labor market more than others. And I think these are really important barriers to overcome if we want to use these technologies and this data in the future. But I guess my main message here is, let's not try and throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's try and improve the data that we have, and let's try and improve these technologies so that we can become better in managing these transitions going forward. So I'll stop talking here. I think I probably talked a little bit longer than my 12 minutes, but I really look forward to our discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stein. I think these were some very, very valuable and very interesting insights. And I very much look forward to the panel discussion now. And with that, and again, without further ado, let me hand over to Biljana Radonjic, Ker-Lindsay, who's the head of our Access to Skills and Employment pillar in the Gender and Economic Inclusion team. Biljana, over to you and to the panel.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Can we please remove the presentation? We have a fantastic set of panelists from all over the world, from very different backgrounds, who use big data technologies and traditional sources for the purpose of skills development and forecasting. So I will just jump straight into the discussion. Let's talk about how we actually in practice assess most effectively current and future skills needs of the labor force. At the national level, we will hear from Singapore. At the EU level, we will hear from CEDEFOP, and also of the workforce at the company level that we will hear from our client. I will introduce our panelists one by one and ask them the first question. Konstantinos Pouliakas is an expert on skills and labor markets at the European Center for the Development of Vocational Training, CEDEFOP, based in Thessaloniki. He's also an honorary lecturer at the University of Aberdeen Business School. He is the lead expert at CEDEFOP's Skills Mismatch and Future of Work projects, and leads on country support programs on improving skills anticipation and skills matching governance at the EU. So, Konstantinos, at CEDEFOP, how do you approach assessing the current and future skills demands in the EU countries by using, as we know, both traditional and more innovative data sources? And what are the benefits and disadvantages of these data sources for an evidence-based understanding of trends in skills supply and demand?
So, good morning from Thessaloniki. Thank you very much for inviting me and CEDEFOP to this exciting discussion on a topic which is, of course, of very high relevance on big data and its application for the future of work. I'm representing CEDEFOP, which is the European Union Skills Agency. And for over 20 years now, almost, what we have been doing is we have been trying to develop relevant EU tools to be able to identify emerging skill needs and changing skill demands in our European labor markets. And we have been doing this using a panoply of different tools. More recently, since 2014, by developing what is becoming the main European big data analysis tool based on scraping online job vacancies. And we are developing this together with Eurostat now, so that formal European statistics on online job vacancies can be published and more insight on changing skill needs can be obtained. But we are not only using big data. As I said, traditionally, we have been trying to identify changing skill needs using a variety of other tools at our disposal, most notably by developing a big aggregate long-term skill forecast model, which enables us to more accurately model the changing demands in terms of occupations, in terms of sectoral changes across our European countries, both from the demand side, but also to take into account changing demographics from the supply side. And we have managed to do this by developing a harmonized methodology that applies across all European countries with similar data, with similar equations in a sense and behavioral modeling. And this is, let's say, the core, the main way through which you can try to understand what type of skill trends will unfold in the next 10 to 15 years. But what was missing with this type of data is the ability to really gain in-depth insights into a specific type of skills. Usually with other type of methods, you're talking about broad aggregate levels of skills. With big data analysis and the online job vacancy analysis tool that we have developed, we are now in a position where we can really get insights on very detailed levels of skills. Indicatively, at the moment, we have information for more than 3,000 skills, which are demanded by EU employers in over 100 million online job vacancies that we have at our disposal, at our database. This enables us also to try to provide more timely and more real-time insights into how labor markets are changing, specifically, for instance, by also more recently tracking how the pandemic has been influencing changing skill demands, for instance, by giving rise to increasing needs for basic and digital and advanced digital skills, but also more demands for marketing and sales strategies, which are very much based on the notion of being able to promote a digital enterprise, which is increasingly using a remote workforce. But as our OECD speaker Estine mentioned before, by using this new fascinating big data tool, we are also increasingly becoming aware of its limitations, of the big biases that characterize big data analysis, because, for instance, when you're just using information from the online labor market, it is by default the case that you're going to be getting information from specific parts of the labor market, and you're not examining another huge part of the labor market where vacancies are usually not filled by online job posting. As you know, vacancies are usually filled internally within companies, by word of mouth. So there is potential for a big biases and lack of representativity. And we should always bear in mind that when you're using big data information, it's also not necessarily the case that what you're seeing are skills that are needed for workers to carry out their actual jobs. It's the skills that employers are requesting so that they can attract applicants. So there's a difference between the type of information that you would want, which is to give you a full description of the skills profile that a job needs and what workers need to carry out their job, and a difference with what you're actually getting from big data type of information. One final point I guess I can say is that in general, we should be bearing in mind that with other type of conventional data sources, we usually design them ourselves. And we design them in a manner where we do so that we can analyze the data. With big data, you're following the reverse process. You're using data which hasn't been designed by researchers, by policy institutes. You're using data which are market, essentially data, generated for a variety of different reasons and behavioral purposes. So the real challenge when you're getting real big data and you're trying to get insights from it is essentially the investment that you need to make to clean the data, to classify the data, and essentially to try to make sense of it. So I'll stop here for the sake of time, and we can get back also afterwards in further discussion.
Thank you very much, Konstantinos, for putting this more nuanced understanding of the issues to us, and in particularly this point about what is the purpose of a particular data source. So we will hear more about it from our panelists from Singapore on precisely how important it is to know what you want to do when you start. So from sunny Thessaloniki, I think we're going to go on the other side of the world to sunny, or by this time of the day, probably sunset in Sydney. Michael Colo is the chief economist of the Fathom consultancy, which combines proprietary analytics with client data to anticipate the likely impact of emerging technologies on jobs, workforce, companies, industries, locations, or whole economies. Using algorithms, the company interprets clients' data to estimate strategic, technological, and people impact, including the likely supply and demand of jobs and skills in the future. So, Michael, Thank you for being with us today. Fathom relies on big data and AI to model the effect of emerging technologies on human capital so that businesses and governments can make decisions on how to equip their workforces for the opportunities, but also the drawbacks that technologies create. Can you give us a few highlights from the various applications of your model, such as perhaps the effect of automation or the shift to green technologies? Over to you, Michael.
Right. Hello. Welcome from Australia. It should be sunny, but it's winter. First of all, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm listeners that we have not coordinated the messages, but they're astoundingly similar. So I think what's interesting is listening to Stein's work, listening to Constance, the way we think about the world in this very rigorous scientific kind of model way is really nice to see. So we've all kind of come to similar places, but using perhaps slightly different data sets and different approaches. So Fathom AI, as you mentioned, is a future of work workforce analytics company. And maybe I'll start here is what we really are thinking, what we're really talking about question is what drives the demand for that. That's really what we've been talking about. And ultimately the things that drive the demand for labor by increasing or by decreasing it will impact therefore skills, tasks to be done in an economy, and essentially the role that humans have to play in the economy. We know from classic macroeconomics, we've got capital, got human resource, these two things come together and give rise to economic growth and capitalist system. I think the effective automation, as we've already discussed, and technology has a special place in all of our hearts because of the rise of AI and these types of more predictive, malleable algorithms that are able to many different industries. We've always had technology as a way of changing the way that we do our job. We've always sought efficiency, and those have created economic wealth and abundance for us around the world. We are,
Michael, I'm sorry to apologize. I'm sorry, Michael, to interrupt you. Could you please switch off your camera because we have trouble hearing you. The connection may not be that good. But if you would switch off your camera, we might be able to hear better. Let's try.
Is that better?
Slightly better.
Or I will speak and repeat occasionally. Or is it the same?
Let's try.
All right. There is a plan B. So if it's not working very well, I shall dial in on another connection, and you can go to another speaker. I can.
Maybe for this, let's try for the second for the second question. If you would just conclude your thought for this round.
Problem. So at Fathom, what we do is we have a very quantitative way of understanding the labor markets. We have over 5,000 different kinds of jobs, which we split into over 26,000 different tasks, and we match them to 17 different types of AI technologies. We model the adoption rates of those technologies across different industries and countries, and we derive a very quantitative and data-led view as to what is the impact of all different technologies across all those different jobs in all different industries. The purpose of doing all this work is essentially to understand how much less human labor is required in which areas of the economy, in which jobs. Very similar at a high level to what information we saw from Stein as an example. I think maybe the slight thing I'll add to that is that when you start to think about what else is driving the demand for labor across an economy, we are also thinking about those effects and those large industries that are falling and growing, and potentially thinking about those in the context of driving the demand for labor and skills as well. So green energies rising to meet the challenges of global warming, as an example, will drive a lot of jobs and labor demand, and will also have skills demand in certain areas. That demands in different countries could actually overwhelm the effect of technology as well, and actually change the shape of those types of workforces in different directions. So I think while the beating drum of technology marches on, and we certainly want to understand its effect across these emerging markets and different countries, I think it's also noteworthy to include with that analysis the tectonic shifts in the competitive industries that we see all around us. And the combination of these two things, technology and industry competition, will give a rise not only to what's happening today, but also what is likely to unfold in the next 10 or 15 years' time.
Thank you, Michael. You make some very good points, and I think we managed to hear you very well. So I think if you stay there, that would work. So our next speaker, I'm very excited to introduce Sunju Gog, who is the first Chief Futurist. What a wonderful title. And the Chief Skills Officer at the SkillsFuture Singapore, which is part of the Ministry of Education. She leads a team of job skills analysts, data scientists, and futurists to identify global trends that impact business, jobs, and skills in Singapore. So, Sunju, welcome. Lovely to have you here. SkillsFuture Singapore promotes a holistic system of lifelong learning through skills intelligence. How do you assess skills mismatches and anticipate new skills to strengthen the links between the labor market and education and training systems?
Thank you, Biljana. Thanks for the invitation for myself and SkillsFuture Singapore to share our work. I would say that the whole skill identification, it is not the sole responsibility of my team and myself or my agency. Actually, it involves the whole economy. So typically, we will call for meetings with enterprises, trade association and chambers, labor unions, government agencies, including education institutions, to sit at the same table to talk about where's the future directions of the economy that they want to see in terms of industry. From there, they discuss the future directions, the possible growth strategy. At the same time, we will discuss the manpower and skills needs. So over the last couple of years, we have been doing this repeatedly. And in the phase one of skill industry transformation map, part of the process is identify the business directions. And one of the key pillars is identified in manpower and skills. And we developed 34 priority industry skills framework. And that is through really conversations with employers. And the ground approach over the last 5 years allow us to convert the skills framework into database today. And now we're able to develop our own skills taxonomy, our occupation taxonomy, critical function taxonomy, key task taxonomy. So that whole ontology allow us now to look into using that as a reference point, look at job posting data as what Constantino has mentioned or Stein has mentioned, and then we look at what are there changes that's coming. We also look into, we also use a LinkedIn database as well to triangulate to say that are we seeing things, emerging area that we have not seen in Singapore. So as a comparison. So these are kind of things that we try to do, use data and also continuously supplementing ongoing survey, labor force study to complement the work that we do. But I think the most important point I want to make is to identify skills need to ensure the skill supply and demand matches. We need the conversations or all the key stakeholders coming together. That's beyond the data. Data is just supporting mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunju. That's very, very important message of the involving all stakeholders, and also this joined up approach of the government to make sure that that skills is not just the job of the Ministry of Education. Thank you very much. Our final panelist is Uğur Yıldız, who is an HR and organizational change manager at Tofaş, a large Turkish automotive company whose stock is held equally by FCA Fiat Chrysler Automobiles and Koç Holding. Tofaş is also a long-standing EBRD client. Uğur leads Tofaş Academy, which provides learning services to over 17,000 Tofaş dealers and suppliers in the value chain and students of various high schools and universities across Turkey. Uğur, Tofaş needs to ensure that employees' skills match the company's business objectives and also respond to global trends in the automotive sector. Now, with your HR hat on, can you please tell us more about your approach to strategic workforce management at Tofaş? Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Biljana. Yes, as you said, in recent years, we have been employing a different approach in workforce planning, which is generally referred in literature as strategic workforce planning, as you said. Let me explain by referring to what we did this year. Immediately after the strategic review process, we organized workshops targeting each strategy and by calling people from different functions. We asked what are the specific achievements we are aspiring, we are targeting, what skills do we need, and at which skills do we have gaps. And after that, after this conceptual study, let's say, we also went to the shop floor. We established a cross-functional team, including an IT expert, a training and education expert from academy, a talent expert, let's say, from talent team. They laid down all the projects, initiatives that are either ongoing or planned in the short term. They dissected, let's say, all these projects and found out whether our findings in the conceptual study are also existing are coherent with the what is going on in the shop floor, let's say. And they identified quite a lot of skills related with data. For example, when what we understood after that study was that especially in industrial area, the level of automation is very high. It is even increasing continuously. There are too many robots, cobots. They are being utilized in manufacturing operations or some controlling audits and so on. So for that reason, the team in industrial area wants more people to be competent on digital skills and data related skills. They want people, even blue collars, to be competent on supervisory control and data acquisition architecture of, for example, that robotic equipment, so that they can retrieve data, do some manipulation on the data, and then use it in order to supervise the equipment in a better way. They want people to be more competent in statistics, for example, so that they can better manipulate the data. They are now trying to do some machine learning projects in order to make the equipment smarter. So without the intervention of any human being, the equipment can, let's say, acquire the data, manipulate it, and adjust itself based on the data again. So now we configured some trainings, some development programs for the very high priority skill gaps we have, and they are in progress. Many people are receiving those trainings, and it seems that we will continue to invest even more in the future. So more of our workforce will be required to be competent, let's say, in data-related skills.
Thank you, Gulcem. This is very interesting, and it seems that this idea of the distinction between blue collar and white collar jobs is disappearing more and more, and the digital skills are needed across the board. Okay, so we've heard how we assess skills. Now, once we've assessed it, what do we do about it? How do we go about developing the right skills? So I'll go back to Sunju. SkillsFuture Singapore is renowned for a very effective, holistic yet pragmatic, we would say, approach to reskilling and upskilling the workforce. How do you promote a smooth transition from school to work and inform career progressions and training provision in Singapore?
Thank you. Thanks, Biljana, for the very kind words. I would summarize it in a way that once we identify the emerging skills need and the in-demand skills need, it is very important to look for education and training institutions who can deliver the programs. So we actually work a lot with university, our polytechnics, and also our Institute of Technical Education and private education institution, including big employers, to say that can you open up your training facilities and do all this training together. So the skills insight is then cascaded down into program fairly quickly because we want to make sure that the programs, the courses are ready. At the same time, we also will make available funding subsidy, cost fee subsidies to citizens and to the employers to say that these are the areas that in demand in skills, we will subsidize and defray the out-of-pocket expenses. So do come for the training. And we also do a lot of signposting. Signposting means how do we make the message known to the individuals, known to the employers, known to the market. And that signposting will require a lot of planning in terms of how do we get a message out? Do we get a message out through the labor union? Do we get a message out to certain professional community? I think these are very, we have to thought through very carefully how to get a message out so that people can make informed decisions. And we also have a online portal, it's called My SkillsFuture portal, where individuals can log in to take a look at what are the in-demand skills needed for their industry and for their profession. And supporting them is additional, we call SkillsFuture credits for Singaporean 25-year-old and above. So they have the first $500 credits given to them in October 2016, and we just top up last year in October 2020. So everybody have about $1,000 if you have not used it, and they can use that to totally defray any out-of-pocket expenses at all. So I think I would say that the translation from insights to programs to then removing the barriers and enhancing the accessibility, including not just online, the offline face-to-face advisory services from public employment career services to just learning and skills ambassador that we put across our country is to allow people to have the kind of conversations. So I think it's about translating insight into practical programs that people can sign up and then and ensure accessibility to all. That's my summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Suju. Michael, over to you. Besides identifying skills needs, your model can also be used more granularly. How can your insights on similar tasks and job corridors across different occupations help decision makers select appropriate reskilling and upskilling programs?
Hey, so we're going to try this without the camera. It's going to work. It's going to be okay. So I think what we have developed at Fathom and how we try to help with this problem is around exactly skill corridors. So a skill corridor is essentially a single or probably in the future multi-step process by which an individual can get themselves ready to transition into a different job. So when we think about the acquisition of skills and we think about retraining in different areas, we really are thinking about it within the context of getting another job. And typically the other job is in another industry. So it's not just about reskilling up the food chain in the company or getting a promotion, but we are talking about moving across industries. And we really are thinking about that because our models would suggest that the impact of automation and AI will be quite different in different industries. And so you will have quite a lot of migration across those industries. So if you think about what is required in order for someone to move and from one job to another, to reskill, to retask, to redeploy, one measure, certainly the quantitative measure that we tend to base a lot of our analysis around is around skill proximity. We have about 240 measures of skills for an individual job, and these include knowledge-based, context, as well as a bunch of others. And really the proximity between any one of those two categories, some of which can be filled through formal education, some of which has to be filled through experience and apprenticeships and those kinds of things. But in addition to that, I think it's important to understand that when you're giving a path to somebody to reskill and to take the time to do so, you really have to give them a positive ROI, a return on their time, I guess, return on investment. So therefore, the demand for the job that they want to go into the future has to be something that is going to be highly demanded. The cost of reskilling that individual for that new job has to be worthwhile in terms of the salary of that job that they're going into. The capability to reskill has to be considered. The individuals at age 20 will have vastly different ability to reskill and retrain than people at 45 and 55, because their library of skills will be quite different. And therefore, which skills do you improve and in what order, I think it is quite important here. And then finally, when you are reskilling or migrating a workforce, so you're not just migrating individuals selectively, but let's say that you have a problem where an entire part of your workforce, for example, coal mining or manufacturing, you forecast will be out of work in the next 5 or 10 or 15 years. The question becomes, how do you move groups of individuals across the entirety of the workforce? How do you do what we just discussed about skills deployment, but also about all of the other facets of new knowledge acquisition and moving people across those jobs en masse? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have when we talk to governments and to large organizations of how to solve that.
Thank you, Michael. That is really quite challenging. Over to Konstantinos. You advise the European Commission and member states' ministries of education on the use of labor market and skills information, including big data, we had, to inform vocational education and training and skills policies. Can you give us some examples of countries that have made significant advancement in this area?
Sorry, apologies. What I would like to do is to... Sorry, I have an echo. Can you hear me well? Okay. So I would take up the point which I found extremely interesting, the point made by Sunju, namely that data is just the first initial step. So at Cedefop, since a couple of years ago, we have been working very closely together with specific countries, for instance, Greece, Estonia, Bulgaria, Slovakia, in trying to improve what we are calling their skills governance system. And why I found Sunju's point very interesting is because we have developed a full holistic skills governance framework, an analytical model, a model where, in a sense, we realized that if you really wanted to improve your country's ability to identify skill needs, but then in particularly use that type of information in a sensible way, in a sensical way, in a way where you can actually move ahead and take actions and implement programs whereby you're revising your education training provision, then we developed a model which has more than 60 pillars, more than 100 indicators, and a model in which the methods and the tools and the data sits very much at the center, but it's only one key block, one block out of multiple other blocks, which would include the technical capacity that the country has to develop these methodologies, the resources available, the extent to which the different ministries and the different stakeholders are working together and in sync in order to implement policies on the basis of labor market information, and also the extent to which you're ensuring the sustainability of the system, because taking up the point made by Mike about how we are also continuously trying to develop reskilling pathways and to use the data to be able to give directions as to which occupations are declining or automated, which occupations have significant promise. I always bear at the back of my mind that because of data deficiencies, because of methodological constraints, and also because of the tremendous dynamics that we are faced with in our economies, these things are not definitive. It may very much be the case that in a couple of years we have to revise our projections and we have to rethink the way in which we are conceptualizing the way in which the labor market is changing. So the key aspect for me is to ensure that you develop in your country the skills governance infrastructure, whereby all stakeholders are working together concertedly with clear responsibilities and actions and roles, so that this dynamic process of continuously identifying skill needs in your economy and continuously rethinking your education training system can be sustainable. So I'm sorry if I spoke a little bit too long at the margins of your question. Which countries, in my view, skills governance infrastructure. It does include, for instance, Finland, which is a country which uses a variety of tools, both skill forecast and foresight type of tools, and do make a very good and clear linkage of their vocational education training system to their skill needs. It does include Ireland, who has developed specific multi-stakeholder body focused on the identification of needs, but also a specific skills and labor market research unit, which is bestowed with the responsibility of identifying changing skill needs and is ensuring that the ministries of labor and education are more or less talking to each other in a concerted manner. It does include Belgium, because Belgium, and in particular the public employment system, the VPAB, has developed an exceptional tool, the Compass tool, where using AI technologies, they are managing to, from the one side, have a cartography of the skills of job applicants, and on the other side, get information from vacancies of employers and manage to develop an algorithm trying to develop a skills matching probabilistic approach. And also it does include Greece, which I have been working very closely in the past 4 or 5 years in developing this capacity building approach, because in Greece, they did something which I would say is so simple to do, but is the very first step. They tried to harmonize a huge variety of different data sets that they had at their disposal from the side of the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Migration, Ministry of Investment and Competitiveness. And they brought it all together in what they're calling the mechanism of labor market diagnosis. And by just managing to link 4 or 5 different data sources that existed there for a decade or so, but never managed to speak to each other, they have now developed a tool, which is a big data real-time tool, which enables the Greek government to zero in even to the level of a street in Thessaloniki and manage to see where is their business activity, where are enterprises opening, where are enterprises closing, and what type of skills are these changing enterprises requesting.
Very much, Konstantinos. This is fascinating. I think a very useful experience from Greece on linking these various data sources would be quite useful for our countries of operations. I will go now to Uğur Cem. Tofaş uses big data in modern technologies extensively as part of its production processes. What are your future plans to utilize these innovative tools for skills anticipation, hiring and training at the corporate level and in your value chain?
Okay, thank you for the question. As you said, we have found the opportunity to implement big data technologies mainly in industrial area due to the fact that it is technologically viable and also financially feasible. Up until now, we couldn't find actually many scenarios in HR. Either we failed to make the scenarios technically viable or financially feasible. Big data can answer many questions, but first of all, you have to have easy access to sufficient amount of data, sufficiently qualified data, let's say. So in some scenarios, we couldn't do that, but still we are working actually. We have some aspirations, as you said. One important area that big data can really prove very useful is recruitment actually. We spend enormous amount of effort and also money to select best fit candidate, to identify whether someone is a good fit for the role and also good fit for the culture. For that purpose, we are doing a lot of assessment actually to understand, identify, assess, let's say, the experience, behavioral tendencies, personality traits, motivation drivers, and so on. If we can utilize big data in that area, it can really, let's say, remove a big burden over HR actually. Another important area that we think big data can be useful is in training. Training is an expensive investment, and most of the time it is, let's say, difficult to create impact too, especially on behavioral training and development initiatives. So we think that we can utilize big data in order to understand how much effective a potential training initiative, development initiative can be, or what makes a effective potential an effective training initiative, let's say, a good. So big data again really can be useful in that respect. Another area that we are considering to use big data is retention. Who is about to leave? This is a good question that big data can answer. And what are the reasons of leave also can be studied with the technology of the big data domain, we believe.
Thank you very much, Uğur, and this is very interesting. We had a bit of a bumpy start, and the event is coming to a close. So for the final round of questions to panelists, I would like to hear some of your recommendations for governments, companies, and EBRD as an investor on the best way of preparing workers for the future of work. I will start with you, Michael. What would be your recommendations?
Hey, so I'm going to pick on countries for a second, and I'm going to say that I think looking at the present is easy or easier. We have data, we have people looking for work today, we have jobs, we have skills, and what we essentially have is a matching problem that we've spent some time talking about today. I think the future is much harder. It's much less certain. If you're a policymaker and you're a country and you're thinking about your future, the future is partly in your hands, and the policies you adopt will be your future. And how you deal with this type of changes will essentially determine whether your economy thrives or it goes into decline. The future of industries is the future of work and the future of the workforce demand for you and your citizens. Technologies and the movement of industries will shape the demands and pivot your workforce in skills and in tasks and in wages, but in ways that are really, really hard to anticipate and really hard to forecast in reality. Really, a workforce is only enabled if your industries and your economic growth is going on and there is demand for those people to have good jobs and well-paying jobs. I really would advise people to start thinking about your workforce as the object of interest. That if you have a good workforce that is healthy, that is equal, that is well-skilled, that is well-developed, that is hopeful about its future, then your economies can pivot and grow and take advantage of whichever industries will rise into future and basically transition across those different jobs and those different futures. AI is just one bump in the road. We'll have many, many more in the coming decades. And some of these we can not anticipate in advance. I think COVID is a great example of that. So really what you're looking for is a resilience in your workforce. And rather than thinking purely about economic policy, you should really be thinking about policy that enhances your workforce and places your workforce as the main driver of your economic future in your country. I mean, the ideal that we all, I think, talk about and strive toward is a well-compensated, flexible workforce that is productive, that's fulfilled, and that's hopeful about its future. And I think that's a key role of a long-term workforce economics, essentially planning for countries in this a period of uncertainty. And data analytics that we discussed today is one part, and I think quite an essential part of that planning, especially if we, 10, 15 years ahead. But I think it's a mindset change away from GDP growth and perhaps more classic macroeconomic language or policy and toward workforce development and enablement and flexibility.
Thank you, Michael. This is very interesting. What you're talking about. Of course, the resilience of the workforce is crucial. Konstantinos, what is your take on this? What would be your final messages on the best ways of preparing workers for the future of work?
Okay, so I mean, obviously, the main recommendation, also taking up all of the discourse that has been taking place on the future of work and on the risk of automation, is that we more or less know what type of skills one can call future-proof, And these type of skills obviously include skills that cannot be done by machines, including problem solving, complex thinking, but in particular also empathy, ability to work together with other human beings, and ability to work together with machines in the future. So I think this is pretty much clear, you know, that also education and training systems should be thinking in terms of ensuring that future generations of learners have a good level of technological literacy, a good level of data literacy, and also at the same time, a good part of all of these other human and complex problem solving type of literacies. What I always think also in terms of the future of work, based on this notion that there's increasing transitions, but we should also consider that the transitions are changing. We're no longer talking about transitions of individuals going from one job, which is a relatively solid, permanent contract job, and you're moving to another organization. What we're increasingly seeing is that individuals are also moving increasingly from one job to another project, sometimes working by himself as a freelancer, sometimes trying and providing his labor inputs in the platform economy. So in this sense, we have done a study at Sedefop called the CrowdLearn study recently, trying to understand what are the skills that these workers who are very much working in the platform economy require. And one of the key skills that we have seen is important is called self-regulatory skills. What does that mean? It means that individuals should again acquire an ability to be able to take stock of where they are in terms of their career, to identify their skill gaps, to think in terms of what possibilities and alternative trajectories their career may take them through. So they very much need to become agile. And the educational system, by also adopting a sort of blended learning approach, can try to develop these type of self-regulatory skills. Concluding, from the side of businesses, I would say that we are all aware of the tremendous possibilities that big data analytics offers in terms of hiring, in terms of training, in terms of performance assessment, even in terms of disciplining. And there, I think businesses should be cautious in the sense that we are now increasingly having this discussion about how we can see, especially with COVID, that more and more businesses who are adopting big data and AI analytics are using these technologies for the purposes of more or less becoming a more controlling, a more lean type of organization and establishment. Whereas we know that organizations that are really doing better in terms of facilitating employee well-being and subsequently company performance are those organizations which facilitate autonomy of workers, facilitate their ability to do complex jobs and complex tasks. So I am a little bit afraid about the fact that there is some anecdotal evidence at the moment that more and more organizations are using AI and big data technologies to sort of try to monitor and more closely supervise workers and employees, whereas what they should really ensure is they should ensure that whenever new technologies are implemented, they should accurately inform their workers. They should try to involve them in a consultative manner in the implementation of these technologies. I conclude by just making one final point, because the skills arena is so complex. You have workers, you have businesses, you have training providers. Another main field of the training market arena that is also changing and becoming very fluid is the arena of training providers. We're also moving into a world where we are no longer reliant and dependent only on traditional educational providers, university, vet schools, in terms of providing these new future work skills. There are a wide array of new actors, NGOs, municipalities, and even online labor platforms who are moving into the training arena. So there's going to be big challenges in terms of ensuring that we can still sustain highly relevant and high quality training provision in the future for workers, for employees, for individual learners.
Thank you, Konstantinos, very much. You make excellent points about the importance of agility for each of us individually as learners, but also raise some warnings for businesses. Well, at this point, I'm not going to put you on the spot, Uğur, but as a representative of business, I would like to hear your take on what Konstantinos had said. And also, if you wish, from the perspective of a long-standing EBRD client, how could the bank support you best in better designing and implementing skills development and preparing TOEFL for the future of work?
Okay, Michael and Konstantinos actually made quite good remarks. There is nothing too significant that I can add on top of them, but just one small note I can put aside can be about employment inequality. So as far as EBRD's mission is considered, also perhaps underlying stressing this issue can be important. Pace of technology, yes, it is true. It creates a big stress on the current workforce, and for that reason, quite serious reskilling initiatives must be considered in the industry. But while doing that, it is also important not to ignore the disadvantaged groups. Because if we ignore the gap, the inequality problem can grow further. But we can actually reverse this, let's say, trend or problem to also close the gap too. So we can pay more attention to the disadvantaged groups so that they can better close the gap, catch up with the new technologies, be more employable. So in my opinion, EBRD can support initiatives, can incentivize initiatives in the industries, in the countries that it is operating, by let's say investing or letting the companies focus on this part of employment problem in general.
Thank you very much, Uğur. As you heard, Barbara's introductory remarks were about our new strategies for equality of opportunity and gender equality, and we are very much moving towards this more holistic human capital development approach. I would like to ask Sunju to give us final points from the panel. From your perspective, Sunju, where is the future? What is the future of work? What would you like to tell us at the end?
Since I'm the one that gives the last final conclusion of sort, I would come from a policymaker's perspective to say that as Barbara earlier on at the opening address, she talked about inclusive growth and sustainable growth must benefit citizens. I think that clarity of what does it mean at a policy perspective is very important. When you're clear about the intent, then you must know what outcome you want to measure. Is it employment participation? Is it about no wage stagnation? Is it about lifelong ability to actively participate in the workforce? Is it about gender equality in terms of accessing learning, accessing jobs, and equal pay? I think these are things that we need certain clarity so that you know that what the kind of outcome we want to measure before we think about how to identify the skills, what kind of measure, and more importantly, is also ensuring that no one get left behind, whether you are people with disability, and the focus cannot be just about youth unemployment, but I think we look across the world, the middle age has become more and more vulnerable if they are in the wrong industry and wrong jobs. And if people are living longer, how can we help people to stay active, productive throughout their life stages and not suffer from ageism? I think these are, I would think that are very important policy clarity that we need to set at the front, is which issue you want to tackle first in your economy. And I would say the second advice I would think about is this kind of issues, inclusive and sustainable growth, we need all hands on deck. So it is not about just the government leading it. We really need the enterprises, the industries to come in, the education, training sectors to come in, including intermediaries and partners like Phaeton, for example, Michael's company, that are able to use some solutions, or including bringing in Singapore, for example, we love to bring in a well and tested partner to come and help us accelerate certain solutions. I think these are things that we have to be quite open-minded to say, hey, who should we bring in as a key stakeholder in the system, and then should be very biased towards implementation, less of planning, and not so much about just talking about planning and insights, but really it's about moving the needles and get things ongoing on the ground and able to measure. Yeah, that's my advice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sunju. So walking the talk and then doing something rather than just talking about it. So it's a very good panel. I would like to thank our panelists, Uğur, Michael Kolo, Konstantinos, and Sunju, for fantastic interventions during this panel. We've learned a lot. We've reassessed some of our original, perhaps, ideas about the role of big data, potentials and drawbacks. I will close here. I would like to give an opportunity to our keynote speaker, Stein, if he would like to make any closing remarks before our colleague Margherita Calderone provides a few closing remarks and summary. Stein, over to you.
Thank you very much. I apologize. There's a lot of noise in the background, so I'll keep my remarks extremely short. I think what is really critical is trying to build systems and tools that are in place that make our labor markets as resilient and adaptable as possible. So to me, it's not really about, you know, whether right now we can identify the right skills, needs, etc. It's about having the systems in place that allow us to do that, quickly. And I think big data can really help us take a step forward in that direction. So with these very short calls, thank you again very much for inviting me to this really interesting discussion.
Thank you very much, Stein. That was short and sweet, very clear, the importance of systems. I would just pass over to my colleague Margherita for a few closing remarks. Margherita, over to you.
Thank you indeed to all the speakers. I think it was a very interesting discussion. We definitely heard about the potential of big data in terms of offering better granularity for evidence-based policy. Our keynote really summarized it well, as in terms of big data can be used to identify in quasi real-time vacancies, the skills that are going to be future-proof, larger talent pools, better matches, and improve also the targeting of our interventions. And here, the EBRD could help in replicating some of the models and tools that exist in Europe and the OECD to the neighborhood. But I think the speakers also all agreed on the need to acknowledge the limitations of big data in terms, for example, of the limited representativeness. And we saw in the presentation that artificial intelligence risks exacerbating inequalities by favoring high skills occupations. To address this, we heard from Sunjun and Konstantinos and Steinos at the end of the importance of skills governance and labor market systems, and using holistic analytical models, bringing different stakeholders together, not only the Ministry of Education, but also relying on various information sources to combine big data with more traditional tools. And of course, of ensuring that the process is dynamic, because that's the advantage of big data. The role of models is also to consider the return on investments and to make the case and a clear value-added point of the importance of investing in improving the resilience of the human capital. And here again, the EBRD can play a role given its already existing track record in setting up and running public-private platforms. In terms of practical implications, we heard across the board, in particular from Michael, the importance to identify as a first step which jobs might disappear, and then to support the workforce, in particularly middle-aged adults and older workers, with the right retraining solutions based on the skills proximity, individual capabilities for reskilling, and overall structural changes. But to successfully manage transitions, it's not only about lifelong learning, it's also about to continue supporting the education of young adults, as the data suggests that entry-level jobs are those more affected by automation. And we heard about the importance of working with education providers, as EBRD always does, including employers that can provide work-based learning to make sure that once the skills in demand are identified, one can ensure that the right training programs are then designed according to the market relevance. I think it was particularly useful to hear from Biljana as well, and that confirmed our assumption about the key importance of adopting a strategic workforce planning approach at the private sector level to make sure that this business plan aligns with the skills development plans, so that companies can set in motion the right investments in terms of the skills needed for the future of work. So thank you very much, all of you. Has been particularly useful in terms of how we are going to go about designing our approach on the future of work going forward.
Thank you very much, Margherita. I think it's a fantastic summary and very clear pointers and entry points for us for operationalizing this thinking around future of work. So once again, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists, to the audience, and we hope to be able to let you know about what have been practically doing in this field as an investor, as EBRD. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.